The red bus always came at exactly 2:17 a.m. every night without fail, and no one ever saw who was on it. Some said the passengers were ghosts. Others swore they'd seen nothing but shadows moving behind the tinted windows. It never stopped, not at a single stop, not at the corner of Elm and Maple, not at the old church on Oak Street. It just kept rolling, its wheels clattering against the pavement like the rattle of a coffin being pulled through a dark tunnel. I had no reason to care about it, really. But then, one night, I saw something. Or rather, someone, that changed everything. Before we go any further, make sure to hit the subscribe button. You won't want to miss what's coming next. I'm Mark, 27 years old, a small-town guy who never really thought much of his surroundings. I moved here 6 months ago, looking for something that I couldn't quite explain. Peace, maybe. It's funny, but when you get older, the noise of life starts to wear on you, and you look for quiet places to hide, places that don't demand anything from you. So, when I found this town, Haydenfield, tucked away just outside the city, I thought I had finally found my escape. The people here were nice enough, polite in that distant way small-town folk are. They didn't ask too many questions, and neither did I. The streets were wide and empty at night, the houses neat but lifeless, like movie sets with no actors. Nothing ever happened here, at least that's what I thought. Then came the bus. It wasn't even a matter of me trying to see it. It wasn't that I was drawn to it. No, it just became part of my routine, something I noticed in the corner of my mind every single night. Around 2 a.m, I would be out on the porch, the cold air making my breath hang in the night. I was a night owl by nature. I had a job that kept me up late, working in the toll booth at the highway exit, so I'd be awake long after everyone else had gone to sleep. That's when I first saw it. The red bus. I couldn't tell you exactly why it stood out to me. Maybe it was the way the streetlights barely touched it, or how the sound of its engine seemed muted, as though it didn't belong in the world of living things. I'd be sitting on the porch, staring off into the darkness, when I'd hear it. Just a distant hum at first. By the time I turned my head, it was already there, rolling slowly down the street. It never stopped, and yet it seemed to pass by my house at the exact same time every night, just as if it knew I was watching. I didn't think much of it at first. Who would? It was just a bus, right? A late-night route that no one bothered to talk about. There were lots of buses like that in big cities. Ghost buses. Buses that no one really paid attention to. Buses that seemed to disappear as soon as they were seen. But then I started hearing things. I don't know when the whispers started. Maybe it was just a passing remark from a neighbor or a strange conversation in the diner, but soon I heard it more often. The bus, they said, was haunted. The people who rode it were not people at all, but lost souls forever circling the town. I told myself it was just superstition, that the small-town crowd had nothing better to do than concoct wild stories. But the bus? That damned red bus? It never went away. It just kept coming, a fixture in my late-night walks, a ghost of steel and rust that floated by my house, its windows reflecting only the shadows of the night. One evening, as I was walking home from the toll booth, I decided I'd had enough. I needed to know what was going on. Was it really empty, like people said? Could I prove that the rumors were just that, rumors? Or was there something more to this bus than I could understand? I didn't know, but I had to find out. So, I stood in front of my house, the cool autumn air biting at my skin, waiting for the inevitable. There it was, the bus, coming down the street as it always did. As soon as I saw it, my pulse quickened. It was closer tonight, closer than ever before. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, that primal instinct we all have telling me something was off. But it didn't stop. It never did. I took a deep breath and started walking toward it. The sound of the bus's engine echoed in my ears, its headlights dim in the distance. My feet were moving before I even realized it. I walked toward the curb, closer and closer to the street. I wasn't sure if I should cross the road, if I should just keep walking and act like it was just another bus, but something pulled me forward. I stopped at the edge of the road, standing there like an idiot, waiting for it to get closer. It slowed down, just slightly. The engine sputtered, then hummed again, but there was no sign of the driver. No one at the wheel. The bus rolled right past me. For a second, I saw something. Just a flash, but enough to make me stop dead in my tracks. Through the tinted windows, I could swear I saw a face, just one face, staring back at me. It wasn't like any face I'd ever seen before. The eyes were wide, unblinking, and the expression was frozen, like the person inside was caught in a moment of pure terror. It wasn't a trick of the light. I knew what I saw, but then, as quickly as it had appeared, the face was gone. The bus rolled past me and kept moving, its engine fading into the distance. The night was still again, quieter than before. I stood there for a long time, frozen in place, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was the exhaustion of the night shift playing tricks on me. But no, something was wrong. I had seen something, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just uncovered something I wasn't supposed to know. The bus never stopped again, and for weeks after that night, it became my obsession. It came, night after night, always at the same time. The red bus, the face, the chilling feeling that followed. The stories I had heard didn't matter anymore. I had seen something real, something that had been hidden from me. I didn't know who or what was behind the wheel, but I was certain of one thing. There was a truth to this bus, a truth that was just waiting to be uncovered. But as I would soon learn, some truths are better left unknown. If you've been enjoying the mystery so far, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for the next chilling chapter of the truth behind the creepy red bus. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. I couldn't shake the image of that face. The way it had stared at me from the window of the bus, those wide, unblinking eyes that never seemed to blink or show any emotion. It felt like something that belonged to a dream, a nightmare that bled into the waking world, but I knew it was real. I had seen it, and now it haunted me. I didn't sleep much that night, the face swirling behind my eyelids every time I closed my eyes. It wasn't just the face, though. There was something else, something deeper. The bus, the way it kept coming back night after night, never deviating from its path, never stopping, but always right there, like it was waiting for me. Waiting for something? I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the stress of my job at the toll booth, the long hours with nothing to do but sit there and think. Maybe it was just the isolation of living in a small town where nothing ever seemed to change. But no matter how many excuses I made, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong with that bus. Something that no one talked about, but everyone knew. So I did what anyone in my position would do. I started asking questions. I went to the diner first. It was the heart of the town, the place where everyone gathered to gossip and share their stories. It wasn't a big place, just a small greasy spoon tucked between two old brick buildings on Main Street. When I walked in, the bell above the door chimed, and the waitress, an older woman with short gray hair, looked up at me over her glasses. "Mark?" she said, as if she'd known me for years. "Coffee?" I nodded. It was always coffee at the diner, strong, black, and endless. I sat down at my usual booth by the window and waited for her to pour me a cup. The place was nearly empty, just a few old-timers scattered at the counter, reading newspapers or talking quietly to each other. The hum of the coffee machine was the only real sound in the room. I didn't mind it, though. It was familiar, comfortable. "You're not here for the pancakes, are you?" the waitress asked, placing the cup in front of me. I shook my head. "No," I said. "Just wanted to ask about something." Her eyebrows raised slightly, a knowing look on her face. "What's bothering you, Mark?" It wasn't an accusation, but more of a gentle nudge, as if she already knew I was about to ask about the bus. I hesitated for a moment before leaning in slightly, lowering my voice. "I've been seeing that bus," I said. "The red one. The one that passes by my place every night. Do you know anything about it?" Her face shifted slightly, her lips pressing into a tight line. She didn't respond right away, but then, after a long pause, she leaned in as well, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "Don't talk about that bus, Mark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's bad news, the kind of news you don't want to dig into." I stared at her, trying to make sense of her words. "Bad news?" I repeated. "People disappear, Mark. People who've tried to follow it, people who've tried to figure out what's going on with it. I've heard stories from people who claim they've seen things that don't make any sense." She stopped, glancing around nervously as if expecting someone to overhear. "But don't go looking for it, all right? You'll regret it." Her warning hung in the air like a thick fog, but I wasn't ready to let it go. I had seen something. I had seen that face, and I couldn't just forget about it. I needed to know what was going on with that bus. I nodded slowly, pretending to take her advice seriously. She gave me a knowing look before walking back to the counter, leaving me with my thoughts and my cup of coffee. I didn't drink it. Instead, I sat there, staring out the window, watching the world go by as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I knew what I had to do next. I had to find out more. That night, I stayed up late, pacing my living room, trying to make sense of what I had heard. I thought about what the waitress had said. Disappearances, people who had tried to follow the bus, tried to uncover its secrets. But what was it about this bus that made it so dangerous? What was the story behind it? I needed answers, so I decided to go to the library. The library wasn't far from my house. It was a small, dusty building that smelled like old books and stale air. There wasn't much to it. A few rows of bookshelves, a computer or two, and a solitary librarian who spent most of her time reading. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I had to find something, anything, that could explain the mystery of the red bus. When I walked inside, the librarian looked up from her desk. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. It was a small town. She knew everyone. "What can I do for you, Mark?" she asked. "I'm looking for something about the red bus," I said, my voice steady, but my heart pounding in my chest. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment I thought she might tell me to leave. But instead, she stood up slowly and walked toward the back of the library. "Follow me," she said. She led me down a narrow hallway lined with old, leather-bound books. I followed her in silence, not sure what to expect. She stopped in front of a dusty shelf and pulled out an old, yellowing newspaper. "It's not much," she said, handing it to me, "but it's something." The headline on the front page read, "Tragic Crash, the Vanishing Bus." I looked at the date. It was from 32 years ago, when I was just a kid. The article described a horrific accident. A bus that had collided with a truck, killing several passengers, including a group of children. But then, the story took an even stranger turn. According to the article, after the crash, the bus was never seen again. Not a single trace of it. The wreckage was found, the bodies were identified, but the bus itself had vanished, as though it had never been there at all. I read the article over and over, trying to make sense of it. It didn't make any sense. How could a bus just disappear? How could something so large just vanish without a trace? I kept flipping through the paper, but there was nothing more about the incident, nothing else that could explain what had happened. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach as I realized something. The story wasn't over. The red bus wasn't just a bus. It was something more. Something that shouldn't exist, but did. Something tied to the past, tied to the crash, tied to the disappearances. I didn't know what I was dealing with, but I knew one thing for sure. I was in deeper than I had ever imagined. That night, I sat in my living room, the newspaper spread out on the coffee table in front of me. The red bus had a past, a history, one that no one had talked about for years. But now, I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend that I hadn't seen that face, that I hadn't heard the whispers, that I hadn't seen the bus pass my house every single night. And now, the question was clear. Why? Why did it keep coming back? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I thought about the red bus, the more it gnawed at me, like a constant itch that could never be scratched. I had already seen it. I had already felt it. But now, the knowledge of what I was dealing with sat heavy on my chest. It wasn't just a bus. It wasn't just a weird little town quirk. It was something darker, something that I couldn't explain, and the more I dug into its history, the more I realized I was in over my head. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't walk away. I had to know what was going on. I had to understand why it kept coming back, night after night, as if it were waiting for something, or someone. I had to know if I was the only one who had seen it, the only one who had heard the whispers. So, I did what anyone who had spent too much time in a small town would do. I asked around. I started with the locals I knew best, the ones I'd seen walking by the bus stop, the ones who always seemed to be on the outskirts of my attention, the ones who didn't talk much. I visited a few of the houses on my street, asking subtle questions about the red bus. Some people shrugged it off. Others didn't seem to know anything about it. They gave me blank stares or muttered something about old ghosts or foolish stories. But there was one person who, when I mentioned the bus, didn't flinch. It was Sally, the old woman who lived 2 doors down. She was a recluse, hardly ever leaving her house except for church on Sundays. I had never spoken to her much before, but something in the way she looked at me when I mentioned the bus made me pause. Her eyes were sharp, her face wrinkled, but full of a quiet, knowing kind of wisdom. I didn't know how to respond. She had seen right through me, just like that. But then, before I could say anything, she invited me inside. Her house was dark, the curtains drawn tight, as if trying to shut out the world. The smell of old wood and mothballs hung in the air. Sally led me to a small, dusty living room and sat me down in one of the worn chairs. "You want to know about the bus?" she asked, her eyes glinting. I nodded. What else could I do? I needed answers. Sally didn't speak for a long while. She simply stared at me, her lips thin, as if considering whether or not she should tell me what I needed to hear. Finally, she sighed deeply. "It's not the bus you need to worry about," she said, her voice low. "It's the ones who ride it. They're the ones who are lost." "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. I stared at her, confused, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean, lost?" She shook her head, looking over at the window as though the very mention of the bus was enough to make her uneasy. "They've been trapped," she said softly, as if speaking to herself. "The people on that bus, they were taken a long time ago, and now they're stuck. They're stuck in a loop, riding that bus night after night, never able to escape." I felt a chill run through me. I wanted to dismiss it, to chalk it up to old age or superstition. But there was something in her voice, something in the way she spoke, that told me she wasn't lying. She had seen it too. "Do you know what happened to them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She paused, looking down at her hands. Her fingers were knotted with age, but they shook slightly as she spoke. "The bus crashed all those years ago," she said slowly. "A group of people were on it. A family. A few strangers. There was a driver, a man named Edward. He was the one who—" She stopped, her eyes growing wide, as if the words she was about to say were too heavy to bear. "But the bus didn't die," she continued, her voice trembling. "It came back. And the people who had died, they came back too, but they weren't the same. They were different. They're trapped in the bus now, stuck in some kind of never-ending ride, and every time the bus passes, it picks up someone new. Someone who has been touched by it, someone who doesn't know any better." Her words sent a cold wave of dread over me, and yet I couldn't stop myself from asking, why does it pick people? Why me? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just stared at me with those sharp, knowing eyes. After a long pause, she spoke again. "You," she said quietly, "to your curiosity, to the need to know what others don't. That's how it gets you, by making you want to see, want to understand, and then once it's caught you, there's no getting out. Not unless you—" She trailed off, her voice fading into the darkness of the room. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. The air was thick with tension, and I couldn't breathe properly. But then Sally stood up, slowly, with effort, as if the weight of the conversation had drained her. She turned her back to me and shuffled toward the kitchen. "I'd leave town if I were you," she said over her shoulder. "But if you're going to keep looking, don't say I didn't warn you." I left her house shortly after that, my mind swirling with the horrible images she had painted for me. The bus, the crash, the people trapped inside. It all felt like a bad dream, but one that wouldn't go away. I wanted to forget about it. I wanted to ignore the strange stories and the warning. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. That night, as I sat on my porch, waiting for the bus to pass by, something felt different. There was a weight in the air, something that hadn't been there before. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then, just as I had expected, the red bus came. This time, though, it slowed down as it approached my house, far more than it ever had before. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I stared at the bus, my breath shallow, waiting for it to pass. But then it stopped. The engine sputtered, then went quiet. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. The bus sat there, its red paint almost glowing under the pale light of the street lamps. The windows were dark, but I could feel something, or someone staring out at me from inside. I didn't know what to do. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. Then, the door creaked open. It was like a nightmare come to life. My feet wouldn't move, and my hands were cold and clammy as I watched the door swing open. A figure stepped out of the bus, cloaked in shadow. For a moment, all I could see was the outline of a person, but nothing more. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The figure didn't say anything. They just stood there, watching me, waiting. And then, in a voice that felt both far away and too close at the same time, they spoke. "Get on." The word sent a shock of fear straight through me, freezing me in place. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't work. I was trapped. And just like that, the red bus, the vanishing passengers, and the dark history of it all. It wasn't a mystery anymore. It was my reality. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying the twisted journey of the truth behind the creepy red bus, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Trust me, the story's just getting started. Drop a comment below if you're brave enough to share your thoughts or if you've had any strange experiences of your own. And remember, hit that notification bell so you won't miss any of the chills waiting for you in the next video. Stay tuned, and as always, stay safe out there. The truth is closer than you think.